Welcome to Global Intelligence Weekly Wrap-Up, the podcast where information is transformed into intelligence. Neil Bisson, a retired Canadian Security Intelligence Service intelligence officer and director of the Global Intelligence Knowledge Network, breaks down the security developments, highlighting global tensions affecting events here in Canada and across the Western world. We start in Toronto, where several synagogues were targeted by gunfire over a matter of days, raising serious concerns within the Jewish community and prompting a major investigation by police and national security authorities. We also look at the shooting at the United States Consulate in downtown Toronto, an incident now being treated as a national security investigation and one that underscores how diplomatic facilities can become symbolic targets during periods of international tension. As CSIS warnings that threats linked to Iran and its network of proxy actors remain persistent, particularly when geopolitical conflicts abroad begin influencing security conditions within diaspora communities. In the United Kingdom, where police are investigating suspected Iranian-linked surveillance activities targeting Jewish institutions. Suspected Chinese cyber intrusion involving an FBI surveillance network in the United States, highlighting the ongoing challenge of defending sensitive law enforcement systems from state-sponsored cyber espionage. We look at the long-standing debate over whether Canada should establish its own dedicated foreign intelligence service capable of recruiting human sources abroad. And finally, we break down a remarkable sabotage case in Europe involving Russian-linked operatives who attempted to send incendiary devices through international courier networks. Are you ready? Let's go!
Hello, and welcome back to the Global Intelligence Weekly Wrap-Up. I'm your host, Neil Bisson, a retired intelligence officer with CSIS and the director of the Global Intelligence Knowledge Network. Each week, I take the biggest stories and news articles on national security, foreign interference, international espionage, sabotage, and terrorism, and give you the insights, analysis, and intelligence you need to understand how these articles affect your country, your career, and your safety. It's been another busy week, from shootings in Toronto on religious sites and the U.S. Consulate, to a Chinese state-sponsored cyber hack of FBI surveillance systems. There's a lot to discuss, so let's get into it. We start in Toronto, Canada for our first story, and the main focus of this week. Multiple Jewish institutions in the Greater Toronto Area have recently been targeted by gunfire, raising serious concerns within the Jewish community and among Canadian security officials. Although no injuries have been reported in any of the incidents, the attacks occurred within a short period of time and involved multiple religious institutions, prompting increased police patrols and heightened security measures around synagogues and community centers across the region. These incidents are unfolding during a period of heightened geopolitical tension following the outbreak of conflict involving Iran, Israel, and the United States, adding further concern about whether international developments could be influencing security conditions within Canada. The first reported incident occurred on March 2nd at approximately 10:49 p.m. when gunfire struck Temple Emmanuel in North York shortly after a Purim celebration had concluded. The rabbi was reportedly still inside the building at the time, but no one was injured. Just days later, additional incidents were reported. During the overnight hours on March 6th and 7th, two more synagogues were struck by gunfire within roughly 30 minutes of each other. Shortly before midnight, gunfire struck the Beth Avraham Yosef of Toronto Synagogue in North Hill, damaging the entrance area of the building. Approximately half an hour later, shots were fired at the Shari Shomayim Synagogue in North York, where bullet damage was discovered near the main entrance. Although investigators have not confirmed that the incidents are connected, the close timing of the attacks has raised concerns about whether the shootings represent a pattern, coordinated activity, or potential copycat incidents. Toronto police increased patrols around Jewish institutions following the attacks, while investigators began examining surveillance footage and other evidence to identify possible suspects. Authorities have confirmed that Toronto's police hate crime unit has joined the investigation, reflecting concerns that the shootings may have been motivated by anti-Semitism or other forms of targeted hate. Jewish institutions have historically been targeted during periods of heightened geopolitical tension involving Israel or conflicts in the Middle East. Security experts note that houses of worship, community centers, and religious schools are often viewed by perpetrators as symbolic targets representing broader political and ideological grievances. In Canada, incidents targeting religious institutions quickly attract national security attention, particularly when multiple attacks occur within a short time frame or when geopolitical tensions are elevated. The synagogue shootings in Toronto occurred at a time when the conflict involving Iran, Israel, and the United States has significantly escalated, raising broader questions about whether tensions abroad are influencing acts of intimidation or violence within diaspora communities. From an intelligence perspective, Incidents like these are often analyzed through what professionals term a pattern of activity assessment. Even when investigators have not yet identified a common perpetrator or motive, analysts examine the timing, location, targets, and geopolitical environment surrounding the incident. Religious institutions and diplomatic facilities are frequently viewed as symbolic targets during periods of international tension because they represent political, national, and cultural identities connected to global events. At this stage, investigators have not confirmed whether the synagogue shootings are connected to one another or to any broader geopolitical developments. However, the incidents have heightened security concerns across Toronto's Jewish community and prompted increased vigilance around religious institutions. Prime Minister Mark Carney has publicly condemned the shootings and confirmed that federal authorities, including the RCMP, would assist local police in identifying those responsible. When multiple attacks occur within a short period of time, particularly during periods of international conflict, security agencies inevitably examine them through a broader national security lens. As we will see in the next segment, the Jewish community in Toronto aren't the only ones dealing with the acts of violence since the start of the conflict in Iran. Only days after synagogues in Greater Toronto area were targeted by gunfire, another serious security incident occurred in the city when shots were fired at the United States Consulate in downtown Toronto. Authorities quickly classified the incident as a national security investigation, reflecting the seriousness of any attacks targeting a diplomatic facility. The incident has occurred during a period of heightened geopolitical tensions following the outbreak of military conflict involving Iran, Israel, and the United States. Toronto police say the shooting occurred during the early mornings of March 10th at approximately 5:30 a.m. outside the U.S. Consulate building located on University Avenue in downtown Toronto. According to the investigators, two suspects exited a vehicle near the diplomatic building and fired multiple handgun rounds towards the structure before fleeing the scene. Police later said the suspects were driving a white Honda SUV before exiting the vehicle and firing multiple rounds at the building. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police INSET, or Integrated National Security Enforcement Teams, who are specialized in multi-agency units led by the RCMP designed to investigate criminal threats to Canada's national security, have joined the investigation, which authorities are treating as a national security incident. Police later confirmed that shell casings were recovered near the building and that the exterior of the consulate had been struck by gunfire. Despite the attack, no injuries were reported. Diplomatic buildings are typically reinforced and protected by extensive security measures designed to withstand potential threats. Authorities launched a coordinated investigation involving Toronto Police, federal authorities, and national security investigators. Diplomatic facilities are protected under the international law through the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, which requires host countries to protect foreign embassies and consulates operating within their territory. In recent weeks, the consulate has also been the site of demonstrations connected to the Iran conflict. Protests linked to the war have taken place outside diplomatic buildings in several cities, heightening how international conflicts can generate strong reactions within diaspora communities. Because diplomatic missions represent the sovereign interests of another country, attacks targeting these facilities are treated as particularly serious incidents and often trigger immediate national security investigations. In response to the shooting, security was increased around U.S. and Israeli diplomatic facilities in Canada, while investigators worked to determine the motive behind the attack. Authorities also confirmed that additional security precautions were implemented at several diplomatic locations as investigators assessed whether the incident could be connected to broader geopolitical tensions. From a national security perspective, incidents targeting diplomatic missions are never treated as routine criminal activity. Even when the perpetrators may ultimately turn out to be individuals acting independently, investigators must examine the broader geopolitical context in which the attack occurred. I've recently had the opportunity to appear on CTV News to discuss this event. I noted that incidents like this must be analyzed carefully through a wider intelligence lens, particularly when they occur during periods of escalating international tensions. When attacks occur against symbolic targets such as religious institutions or diplomatic facilities, intelligence agencies must determine whether the events are isolated incidents, terrorist-inspired, copycat actions, or potentially influenced by global conflicts through political actors like Iranian sleeper cells. Authorities at the time of the recording have not confirmed that the synagogue shootings and the attack on the U.S. Consulate are connected. However, the timing of the incidents, which occurred in mere days of each other and during a period of heightened geopolitical tension, means investigators will likely examine them collectively as part of a broader security assessment. For intelligence and law enforcement agencies, the challenge will be determining whether these incidents represent isolated acts of violence or early indicators of a wider pattern linked to international tensions. With the recent acts of violence in Toronto against cultural groups and a foreign consulate, Canadian Security Intelligence Service has recently provided information to the media. Canada's Domestic Intelligence Agency says that threat environment associated with Iran and its network of proxies remains steady but persistent. According to CSIS, the level of concern regarding Iranian activity in Canada has not significantly changed, but intelligence officials assess that the threat is likely to continue for the foreseeable future. These concerns come at a time when tensions connected to Iran are increasingly affecting domestic security environments in Western countries. The warning comes in the context of recent incidents in Canada, including the shooting at the U.S. Consulate in Toronto and the attacks targeting Jewish religious institutions. As I've already mentioned, I recently appeared on CTV News to discuss these developments from a national security perspective and how geopolitical conflicts can sometimes influence security threats from inside Canada. CSIS officials say Iranian actors and their affiliated proxy organizations continue to pose a range of national security concerns. These concerns include foreign interference, intimidation of diaspora communities, and the potential for politically motivated violence. Iran has long relied on a network of proxy organizations across the Middle East and beyond. These groups are used to project influence and conduct operations that allow Tehran to maintain a degree of distance from the activity itself. Looking at this through a national security lens, the proxy model creates significant challenges for intelligence and law enforcement agencies. It complicates attribution and allows state actors to pursue strategic objectives while maintaining plausible deniability. With this in mind, we look at how Canada can be affected by the Iranian regime here at home. Here in Canada, authorities are particularly attentive to the possibility that international conflicts or political developments abroad can inspire violence or intimidation within diaspora communities or against diplomatic facilities. Canada has taken several significant steps over the past decade to address the threat posed by Iran and its security apparatus. In 2012, Canada formally designated Iran as a state sponsor of terrorism under Canadian law. This designation reflected the Iranian regime's long-standing support for militant groups operating in the Middle East and elsewhere. More recently, in June 2024, the Government of Canada listed the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC, as a terrorist entity under the Criminal Code. The IRGC is a powerful branch of Iran's military establishment responsible for protecting the regime and conducting operations abroad through its specialized units and proxy networks. Under Canadian law, listing the IRGC as a terrorist entity means it is illegal to knowingly participate in or support the organization. This is where proxy organizations thrive. The participants of violent activities can claim no affiliation to these groups, thus lessening the association to the terrorist entity and allowing groups like the IRGC to continually recruit them. The terrorist listing also provides Canadian authorities with additional legal tools to investigate, disrupt, and prosecute individuals involved in financing or facilitating its activities. The IRGC has been linked to the support, training, and funding of multiple militant organizations that Canada has already designated as terrorist entities. Iran's use of proxy organizations is a long-standing strategy designed to extend influence while limiting direct accountability. Rather than conducting operations through official state personnel, Tehran frequently works through affiliated groups, militias, and informal networks that can carry out activities aligned with Iranian strategic interests. This approach allows the Iranian regime to pursue objectives ranging from regional influence to intimidation of critics abroad, while complicating attribution and response. In the Canadian context, intelligence agencies remain particularly focused on threats involving diaspora intimidation, foreign interference, and the potential for politically motivated violence linked to international conflicts. The warning from CSIS underscores a broader reality facing democratic societies today. International conflicts do not always remain confined to far-off lands. Many homeland issues follow asylum seekers, making Canada more vulnerable to the repercussions of these conflicts and violence. Through proxy networks, diaspora intimidation, and ideological influence, geographical tensions can sometimes manifest inside domestically secure environments. As I discussed in detail in last week's episode of Global Intelligence Weekly Wrap-Up, where I examined how the Iran conflict could affect Canada, these risks are becoming an increased possibility. When geographical tensions escalate, intelligence services often anticipate that the ripple effects may appear far from the original conflict zone. What we are seeing in Canada, including heightened security concerns and incidents targeting diplomatic and community institutions, reinforces why understanding these dynamics early is so important for national security planning and public awareness. Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, recently mentioned Iranian sleeper cells as being the possible culprits in these recent attacks on synagogues and the US Consulate in Toronto. Although it is still early in the investigation of these attacks, it cannot go without consideration that this may be the case. The Canadian immigration and legal system have and still do allow for IRGC members to immigrate to Canada, and even when identified, these individuals remain difficult, if not impossible, to deport. This lack of coordination between the efforts of the Canadian intelligence community to identify potential members of sleeper cells and immigration and legal systems to imprison and deport them places Canada and Canadians at greater risk. Continued vigilance and increased scrutiny regarding security screening from geographical areas of the world where theocratic regimes rule and conflict among religious groups is prominent is not just a suggestion, it is a necessity to Canada and Canadian safety. We move on to the UK for our next segment, where British counter-terrorism police have been granted additional time to question a group of suspects arrested on suspicion of spying on behalf of Iran. The arrests were carried out in a coordinated raid across parts of northwest London and involve individuals suspected of conducting surveillance on locations and individuals connected to the Jewish community. Authorities say the investigation falls under the United Kingdom's National Security Act, legislation designed to counter foreign state interference and hostile intelligence activity on British soil. 4 men were arrested during early morning operations conducted by counterterrorism police in several London area communities. The suspects include 1 Iranian national and 3 dual British-Iranian citizens. Police believe the group had been conducting surveillance on behalf of the Iranian intelligence services. Investigators are examining whether the locations connected to the Jewish institutions or members of the Jewish community were being monitored. Under British law, authorities must seek judicial approval to extend detention while suspects are questioned in national security investigations. Police successfully applied for additional time, allowing detectives to continue interrogations and gather further evidence as the investigation progresses. Several other individuals were also detained during the operation on suspicion of assisting the suspects, although some have since been released on bail pending further investigation. The arrests come amid increasing concern across Europe about Iranian intelligence activity targeting dissidents, journalists, and Jewish communities abroad. Security services in the United Kingdom have previously warned that Iran has been linked to multiple plots involving surveillance, intimidation, and potential attacks against individuals living in Britain. These activities are often associated with efforts by the Iranian regime to silence critics, intimidate opposition figures, or retaliate against perceived enemies. Western intelligence agencies have also noted that Iran frequently relies on intermediaries or locally recruited individuals to conduct surveillance or preparatory activities, allowing Tehran to maintain a degree of plausible deniability. From an intelligence perspective, cases like this highlight how foreign intelligence services increasingly rely on diaspora networks, dual nationals, or locally recruited individuals to carry out surveillance and operational preparation. These types of activities often begin with seemingly low-level intelligence collection, photographing buildings, identifying routines, or tracking individuals, but can escalate into intimidation campaigns or even operational planning for attacks. For security services, detecting and disrupting these early stages is critical, as surveillance activity is often the first step to more serious hostile operations. The decision to grant police additional time to question the suspects reflects the seriousness of the investigation and the complexity of countering foreign intelligence activities inside democratic societies. As tensions involving Iran continue to play out globally, Western security agencies remain increasingly focused on detecting and disrupting foreign intelligence operations operating within their own borders. The investigation remains ongoing, and authorities have indicated that further developments could emerge as detectives continue examining the suspects' activities and possible links to foreign intelligence services. We head south for our next segment, where in the United States, investigators are examining a cyber intrusion involving an internal Federal Bureau of Investigations network that stores information related to domestic surveillance orders. Early reporting suggests that hackers linked to the Chinese government may be responsible for the breach, raising fresh concerns about cyber espionage targeting sensitive U.S. law enforcement systems. The incident highlights the ongoing challenge Western governments face in defending critical intelligence and law enforcement networks against sophisticated state-sponsored cyber actors. According to officials familiar with the investigation, the breach involved an FBI system that contains sensitive information associated with surveillance activities. The system itself is unclassified, but holds law enforcement sensitive data connected to individuals under investigation. Authorities detected suspicious activity within the network and launched an investigation to determine the scope of the intrusion. Early indications suggest that the attackers used advanced techniques to gain access, prompting a coordinated response involving multiple U.S. agencies. While the investigation remains ongoing, U.S. officials suspect that cyber operation may be linked to Chinese state-affiliated hackers. If confirmed, it would represent another example of Beijing's long-running cyber espionage campaigns targeting government systems, telecommunication infrastructure, and sensitive political and intelligence data. Cyber espionage targeting government networks has become a central feature in modern intelligence competition between major powers. Over the past decade, Western intelligence agencies have repeatedly warned that Chinese state-linked cyber groups conduct persistent intrusions aimed at collecting strategic intelligence. Unlike traditional espionage operations involving human assets, cyber operations allow foreign intelligence services to penetrate networks routinely and extract large volumes of information with relatively low risk. These operations often focus on unclassified but sensitive systems that store operational data, investigative records, or communications metadata. Even when classified material is not accessed, the information obtained can still provide valuable intelligence insights into investigative priorities, surveillance techniques, and government operations. From an intelligence perspective, breaches involving surveillance systems are particularly concerning because they can reveal how security agencies monitor threats and what types of data they collect, and which individuals or organizations may be under investigation. Foreign intelligence services can use this type of information to identify investigative patterns, evade detection, or gain insight into law enforcement methods. In some cases, the information could even be used to warn intelligence targets that they are being monitored. Cyber operations like this also demonstrate how state-sponsored hackers increasingly operate at the intersection of espionage and strategic competition, targeting not only military or classified systems, but also the digital infrastructure supporting law enforcement and intelligence activities. The suspected breach of the FBI network underscores the growing importance of cybersecurity in national security and intelligence operations. As cyber espionage capabilities continue to expand, government agencies face the ongoing challenge of protecting sensitive investigative systems from sophisticated foreign adversaries. China has continuously demonstrated their willingness and ability to attack Western countries' data from intelligence and law enforcement agencies. The investigation into the incident remains ongoing, and U.S. authorities are continuing to assess both the scope of the intrusion and the potential impact on law enforcement and intelligence operations. However, from my personal perspective, this gives the Chinese government an edge over these organizations and allows them to monitor whether their intelligence operations or human sources are being identified. It also provides them with the insight as to who may be providing information to Western nations about the People's Republic of China, compromising Western counterintelligence operations. We're back in Canada for our next segment, where a new study examining Canada's long-standing debate over whether the country should establish a dedicated foreign intelligence service has renewed discussion about the country's intelligence architecture. The research traces decades of internal government deliberations on whether Canada should create an agency capable of collecting intelligence abroad through human sources similar to organizations like the CIA and MI6. The study suggests that Canada's hesitation to create such a service has been shaped by several factors, including the influence of allied intelligence partners, financial considerations, and internal bureaucratic debates within the federal government. The question of whether Canada should operate its own foreign intelligence service has existed for decades. Internal government discussions about creating a CIA-style agency date back to the period following the Second World War and have resurfaced periodically ever since. Despite these recurrent discussions, successive Canadian governments have ultimately chosen not to establish a dedicated foreign espionage service. One factor highlighted in this study is Canada's close intelligence relationship with its allies, particularly the United States and United Kingdom. The thinking being that because Canada participates in highly integrated intelligence sharing arrangements, including cooperation with the Five Eyes Alliance, decision makers have historically concluded that Canada could obtain much of the foreign intelligence it required from its trusted partners. This thinking is both naive and dangerous, because what is unfortunately not recognized nor discussed is that strategic intelligence for the prosperity of their country is a priority for intelligence organizations like MI6, the CIA, and ASIS, or the Australian Secret Intelligence Service. Foreign-based human intelligence organizations focus on collecting information on classified top-secret priority matters relating to military, political, and economic prosperity of their own countries. This means that they are not looking out for Canada's best interest in these areas. They are understandably looking out for their own. If information about a major economic bid from the UK, United States, and Canada to a third non-Five Eye country is in the works, the CIA and MI6 can and will provide a clear advantage to their governments to try to ensure their country's own interests. Just recently, Canada has continued to identify the need to increase our military might. The only country looking out for our interest in achieving any military advantage against other countries is Canada. From a political perspective, Canada is one of the only Five Eyes countries that will continually lose political influence around the world due to the fact that the United States, United Kingdom, and Australia all use well-placed foreign sources and other governments to ensure the political aspirations of their politicians is achieved worldwide. The world has become, arguably, more divisive and competitive than ever, militarily, economically, and politically. Yet another factor in this situation is cost. Establishing and sustaining a foreign intelligence human organization is expensive. Foreign intelligence services require officers posted overseas, operational infrastructure, training programs, and diplomatic and non-official cover across multiple countries. For a middle power such as Canada, governments have often questioned whether the investment would produce sufficient strategic benefit. The honest answer? It would, but not immediately. The economic, political, and military advantages that a foreign human organization bring to their countries is the reason they continue to operate and are incredibly well funded by their governments. They feed intelligence back to their governments, which allows them to dominate the global markets, prepare against military challenges of adversaries and allies, and maintain or increase political influence around the world. However, Canada's intelligence system is somewhat unusual among Western democracies. Most major allies maintain separate agencies responsible for domestic security intelligence and foreign intelligence collection. In Canada, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service focuses on national security threats affecting Canada, while other departments, including Global Affairs Canada under the Global Security Reporting Program, Communications Security Establishment, and the Canadian Armed Forces, only in times of conflict, contribute to foreign intelligence collection and analysis in specific and more limited ways. However, Canada does not operate a standalone foreign espionage service dedicated to recruiting human sources abroad to gather political, military, or economic intelligence. Historical government records show that Canadian officials have repeatedly examined the possibility of creating such a capability over the decades, illustrating that the idea has never completely disappeared from the policy agenda. As I had already demonstrated, supporters of a Canadian Foreign Intelligence Service argue that relying heavily on Allied intelligence creates potential gaps in Canada's strategic awareness. Foreign intelligence services collect information that directly supports national policy decisions, including diplomatic negotiations, economic strategy, and geopolitical assessments. Without a dedicated capability of its own, Canada may be forced to rely on priorities and reporting of its allies. Which we have seen, these goals can counter to our own. Critics, however, caution that creating a new intelligence service would be costly and could introduce additional oversight and accountability challenges. My response to this is, of course it will. But that's the job of a responsible government. The debate over whether Canada should establish a foreign intelligence service is far from new. For more than 70 years, Canadian governments have periodically examined the idea but ultimately chose not to move forward. Yet, shifting political tensions, concerns about foreign interference, and evolving global security challenges are again prompting questions about whether Canada needs to expand its foreign intelligence capabilities. The longer the Canadian government waits to decide on forming a dedicated foreign human organization, the longer our adversaries and allies are leaps and bounds ahead of us. This inactivity jeopardizes Canada's prosperity, security, and our influence on the world stage. For our last segment this week, we go to the United Kingdom and Lithuania, where investigative reporting by the BBC has revealed new details about a Russian-linked sabotage operation that involved sending parcels containing hidden incendiary devices through international courier networks. The story centers on Alexander Suranovas, a 53-year-old Lithuanian man of Russian ethnicity who has been charged with terrorism in Lithuania for his role in sending the packages. According to investigators, the plot formed part of a wider operation linked to Russian military intelligence, the GRU. It involved a network of individuals recruited across Europe to prepare and move the parcels through commercial shipping systems. The operation began in July of 2024 when Suranovas was contacted through the message app Telegram by an acquaintance in Russia identified only by the initials HK. HK offered Suranovas paid work posting parcels internationally. The payment was relatively small, about 150 euros, for a couple of hours' work, and Suranovas agreed to send the packages without knowing what was concealed inside them. If you think this is suspicious, you're right. This is how the gig economy for proxy sabotage agents of the Russian intelligence services work. Don't ask, don't tell, and get paid a few bucks for doing it. Sabotage is the new gig economy in Europe. According to the investigators, Synagogues was instructed to collect 4 parcels in Vilnius, Lithuania, and send them to addresses in London, Birmingham, and Warsaw using commercial courier companies DHL and DPD. The parcels appeared to contain ordinary consumer items, including cosmetics, body lotion, massage cushions, and other products. However, investigators later discovered the items had been modified to conceal sophisticated incendiary devices. Tubes of cosmetics had been refilled with liquid explosive material, while ignition timers were hidden inside massage cushions placed inside the boxes. Another individual in the network, Vladislav Durkevets, a Ukrainian national, had prepared the devices and activated the timers before the parcels were passed to Synagogues for shipment. Communication within the network was conducted primarily through Telegram, where handlers issued instructions, arranged meeting points, and coordinated the operation remotely. Participants often knew only a small portion of the operation and communicated with individuals using nicknames such as HK or Warrior. After collecting the parcels in a park in central Vilnius, Synagogues shipped them through courier offices where CCTV footage later confirmed him sending the packages through DHL and DPD facilities near Vilnius airport. Within days of the parcels being shipped, the devices began igniting across Europe. On the 20th of July 2024, one package burst into flames in Leipzig airport in Germany shortly before it was scheduled to be loaded onto the cargo aircraft bound for London. Another device exploded inside a DPD delivery truck outside Warsaw, while a third ignited at a DHL warehouse in Birmingham in the United Kingdom. A fourth device malfunctioned. Fortunately, no one was injured, but the incidents triggered a major multinational investigation. Authorities have since arrested more than 20 individuals across Lithuania and Poland in connection with the plot. Investigators believe the operation may have been intended to test vulnerabilities in international logistics networks or potentially disrupt cargo transportation routes supporting Ukraine's allies. From an intelligence perspective, this case highlights the growing use of proxy actors and criminal intermediaries in modern sabotage operations. Instead of deploying trained intelligence officers directly, state actors can recruit individuals through criminal networks or online contacts and direct their activities remotely using encrypted communication platforms. Each participant often performs a limited task, transporting materials, assembling devices, or shipping parcels, without fully understanding the broader operation. As regular listeners of the show know, I teach a course at the University of Ottawa's Professional Development Institute, and in this case, it reflects exactly this kind of operational model discussed in Sabotage and Proxy Operations in Modern Intelligence. In that course, I examine how hostile intelligence services increasingly rely on distributed proxy networks, encrypted communication, and commercial infrastructure such as logistics systems to carry out disruptive activities while maintaining plausible deniability. The case involving Alexander Synagogues provides a rare window into how modern sabotage operations can unfold. Individuals are recruited through informal networks, instructions are delivered remotely through encrypted message applications, and global supply chains are used to move devices across multiple countries. Whether the ultimate objective was to intimidate Western governments, disrupt logistic networks, or test vulnerabilities in aviation cargo systems remains unclear. But the investigation highlights a growing trend in modern intelligence competition. The use of proxy actors to conduct sabotage operations while the true organizations remain far removed from the scene. As the conflict in Iran continues, these kinds of proxy operations need to be considered as potential threats against North American infrastructure, supply chains, warehouses, and shipping routes. The IRGC, Hezbollah, and Houthis are all state-sponsored organizations whose primary benefactor is Iran. Just like the attacks in the UK, Lithuania, Germany, and other parts of Europe, these groups could use cutouts or proxies to conduct similar attacks here in Canada and the United States. Well, that's it for this week. As always, the articles for the segments in this episode are in the transcript. I highly recommend that you read them for yourself. The amount of information available is overwhelming and often misleading. That's why I try to provide you with the analysis, insights, and intelligence you need to understand how and why these stories affect your everyday. So until next week, stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe.
That wraps up this week's Global Intelligence Weekly Wrap-Up. Thank you for listening. From the shootings targeting synagogues in Toronto, to the national security investigation surrounding the attack on the United States Consulate, to warnings from Canadian intelligence officials about the persistent threat posed by Iranian proxies, this week's stories demonstrate how international tensions can quickly influence security conditions here at home. Beyond Canada, we also examine suspected Iranian intelligence activity in the United Kingdom, a cyber intrusion linked to Chinese state-sponsored hackers targeting an FBI system in the United States, and the continuing debate about whether Canada should develop its own foreign human intelligence capability. And in Europe, the investigation into Russian-linked sabotage parcels moving through commercial courier networks offered a rare glimpse into how modern intelligence services increasingly rely on proxy actors, encrypted communications, and global supply chains to conduct covert operations. Taken together, these developments highlight a broader reality of today's security environment. Espionage, cyber operations, proxy sabotage, and foreign influence campaigns are no longer distant or isolated events. They are part of a continuous global competition unfolding across borders, institutions, and critical infrastructure. Producing the Global Intelligence Weekly Wrap-Up requires constant monitoring of global reporting, intelligence assessments, and emerging national security developments in order to provide clear and practical analysis each week. If you find value in this work, you're encouraged to support the podcast by visiting Buzzsprout, where you can make a one-time or ongoing contribution. Your support helps sustain independent analysis and ensures this program can continue without interruption. Don't forget to subscribe, share the episode, and leave a review. It helps more listeners discover the show. And as Neil always reminds us, stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe.